following is a CUNY TV special presentation.
I'm delighted to welcome you to our program, and I want you to know that I appreciate that each of you are here this morning early, but last night was a news-making evening, and we have a terrific bunch of experts here, and I want to introduce them and start putting them to work. On my left, Wayne Berman, you may know, has worked in 8 different presidential campaigns, batting .500, which is great, better than anyone on the Mets.
It's a low bar.
He heads the Global Government Relations Group for Blackstone, one of the largest property owners, I think, in North America as well. We're delighted to have Wayne here from Washington. Next to Wayne is Robert George. Many of you know is a columnist for the New York Post, appears on CNN, has a blog, and it also often does, if you follow him, you can know that he also has another career in the nightlife industry and comedy in New York. Really fabulous. That's where you really make your money in comedy.
You clearly don't know comedy.
On multiple levels.
Allison Hirsch is the political director of SCIU 32BJ. They have about 150,000 members, and I'm sure you're aware of the fact that she also worked in the state legislature. She knows both national and state politics. I'm delighted to bring her here because the unions played a role last night, and she'll talk about what happened. And then we brought Jeff Pollack, got him up early. Jeff was responsible for the polling for both the Connecticut and New York gubernatorial races, as well as many congressional races around the country. And he has the distinction of having won this year the Pollster of the Year award. We should congratulate him for that.
He said he admitted he was going to lose, but he didn't concede.
Let me start by asking Jeff Pollack. You know, the Democrats, according to the media this morning, took a shellacking, and I know you were actively involved in many races across the country, congressional. But what happened in New York? Could you help us just explain New York, because that's harder to figure out. Jeff?
Sure, thanks, Mitchell. I thought you were going to intro it and say, how did your people get your ass kicked so badly? It's pretty bad nationally, and in New York it was not much better. Obviously, at the top of the ticket, we had big wins for the governor, the attorney general, and the comptroller, all winning by healthy double-digit margins. But the first thing that you have to look at when you look at the results today, and some of them are head-scratching. You have races like in the congressional race for Dan Maffei in upstate New York, which was trending away from him over the last couple of weeks from a numerical perspective, but he ended up losing by 20. That's sort of unexplainable to some extent, a district that Barack Obama won. You have Louise Slaughter, who will win, we believe, by 500 votes or something like that. Louise Slaughter, who is not on any map of endangered incumbents. So why does this happen? Well, one of the reasons that it happens is you had a 1 million vote drop-off between the last competitive midterm election and this one. 6 million people should have showed up to vote based on all historic trends, and less than 3.6 million people statewide showed up. That is a remarkable, remarkable thing. And you can't just explain that away by, well, the governor was going to win big. Because guess what? In a bunch of those races, we had governors winning very, very big. And so it's not just that. There's something going on. It's happened in New York, and it happened nationally, where turnout is down all over the place. We have an absolute problem in terms of our political system, that the voters have lost total confidence in the system. Turnout's going to continue to drop and drop until these folks figure out that we actually need some revolutionary changes, and I honestly believe that.
Thank you. So we really did have a record low turnout. Record low turnout. What happened last night?
I think 3 things happened. First of all, it's a victory of the establishment of the Republican Party. The party itself went out through its various organs, using its capabilities and money to select candidates of high quality who had an opportunity to win elections. Establishment of the Republican Party last night took back control of all of the levers of power in the party. Second, candidate quality mattered. People ran good races. They ran them effectively. They didn't get mousetrapped into talking about silly things that don't matter and settled issues that are not up for true debate. The third thing that happened is what always happens in elections, which is women decide. And women decide because women listen and men act. So if I sat down with Jeff and I said, look, here are 3 men, let me tell you 4 demographic markers of each of them, he could 98% of the time tell me how each will vote, because men are predictable. Sorry to say that, fellas. Women, on the other hand, actually listen to candidates and make judgments and are trying to figure out who's really offering them something. And last night, women closed the traditional Republican gender gap with women by, some say 50%, some say 60%, but significantly. A lot of Democrats made the fatal mistake that Republicans have made in the last 2 presidential elections, which is they ran away from fundamentally who they were. You know, if I were Mark Pryor or Mary Landrieu or any of these folks, I would have campaigned with President Obama. I would have hugged him. I would have said, look, this is who I am fundamentally, and tried to drive up my base vote. But running away from him, they were offering an ersatz Republican against a real Republican, and of course, they lost.
Let me ask Allison Hirsch, you know, you saw fabulous victory for the marijuana industry last night. Now you can get it in Washington. You can give it away in Washington, but you can't sell it. And in Oregon, you can have it almost legal. What happened with the candidates that the Democrats put up around the country?
So starting, and it's sort of surprising, but I actually agree fundamentally with what Wayne just said about the problems with the Democrats and the Democratic Party. I mean, I think it's less about running away from Obama and more about the fact that they ran away from the issues that are important to voters, Democrat or Republican. I mean, in 4 red states across the country, minimum wage ballot initiatives passed on the ballot last night. Voters voted to raise the minimum wage. In Massachusetts, where Martha Coakley lost, voters voted to mandate paid sick leave. And so the Democrats didn't lose because you know, they were too progressive or they were too left. They lost because they stood for nothing. And the places where Democrats won is where Democrats proudly stood for an agenda that helps working people. So look at Connecticut, our state to the north. Dan Malloy won re-election. It was a very tough race, but people a month ago, 2 months ago, thought he had no chance. Dan Malloy is the most progressive governor in this country. I think similar in Pennsylvania, where Tom Wolf, who is the Democratic candidate for governor and is going to be the next governor of Pennsylvania, beat Tom Corbett, who ran on and governed by defunding education in the state, by taking money out of working people's pockets. And Tom Wolf ran as a populist. And so in the places where Democrats actually ran as Democrats and ran on a working people's agenda, they actually won. The problem is the National Democratic Party is not running on those things.
Robert.
I hate going last because all the good points are already taken. Ditto to what both Wade and Allison said. The Democrats didn't have a message, but there is also something else that's going on. I used to live in Maryland. Went to college down there and lived there for about 10 years afterwards. I can't remember the last time a Republican won in Maryland.
Kathleen Kennedy Townsend ran as bad of a race.
Well, yeah, that's right. I can't remember the last time a Republican won governor as governor down there. So when a Democrat loses in Maryland. Less obvious in Massachusetts because they've been electing Republican governors for a while, but Illinois as well. There is something going on. There is a rejection, at least in terms of the candidates who want to run as Democrats. There is a rejection now. Now whether that is because of President Obama or because Democrats need to figure out something else. I'm not sure. The other point I would like to make is, as the last few weeks, as the election started to close, there were certain rationalizations coming from Democrats saying, well, it's the president, it's a bad environment, but we have to start looking at 2016. Our base will start to turn out. Will turn out then. It's a different kind. It's a different kind of an electorate. And over the last few years, we have seen that at the presidential level, if there is a more diverse electorate out there, Democrats do well. In the midterms, it's less the case. But I think what we saw just yesterday, I'm not sure how long the Democrats can depend on the demographics as destiny argument, because while it's true that the Democratic Party is more diverse, the Republicans actually have a more diverse candidate stable, if you will. In terms of, if you buy the argument that the best way to run for national office is to be elected statewide, take a look at the Republican Party, which has four female governors. It has a Marco Rubio. It has a Ted Cruz. It has a Nikki Haley, Susana Martinez. Tim Scott is the first black Republican elected to the Senate since Reconstruction. Now everybody can argue about the specific positions that any of these individuals take, and people can say, Ted Cruz is nuts and all this other kind of stuff. But the fact is, the Republican bench, in terms of going forward in 2016, is more diverse than the Democratic one. I mean, the Democrats in terms of statewide, people who've won statewide, obviously Hillary Clinton's out there, Cory Booker won yesterday. You've got a few others there, but if the Republicans are smart, like they were, as Wayne said, if they're smart and keep some of their non-winnable people to the side, and they run smart campaigns, and they put together an attractive ticket. There's no reason why they can't start making inroads on women, Latinos, and yes, African Americans as well. So I think that's the thing to look at based on what happened yesterday and going forward.
There was a solid victory for the Republicans in the state Senate, which has a huge impact on New York City as well as the state. Allison, you've worked in the legislature. What can we expect now? Will Dean Skelos, with his solid Republican base on Long Island, be driving the state rather than Bill de Blasio?
I think that, not surprisingly, I think the next 2 years in Albany are going to be complicated and interesting and challenging for the city and for a progressive agenda and for, quite frankly, any agenda. I mean, it's the Republicans definitely won the Senate. Congratulations, folks. But it's a 32-31 majority, right? Like this is not a mandate on any level. I don't think it's clear yet, really, how things are going to shake out, because Governor Cuomo is very clearly, and in his speech last night, in his acceptance speech, he's clearly driving the same agenda that he said he was going to drive. He talked about raising the minimum wage, and he talked about passing the DREAM Act, and he talked about campaign finance reform and all of the pieces that he has been committed to and been trying to pass. The same time, Senator DeFrancisco, right, last night upstate, said the minimum wage is dead. And so, it's just going to be, I wish I could read the tea leaves. I think it's just going to be an incredibly complicated dynamic in Albany as we move forward.
Yeah, Robert.
I was just going to say, but I'd also think that campaign finance reform, or at least the way the governor is talking about it, I think is going to be kind of dead as well. Because he didn't exactly endear himself either to the reformers or the anti-reformers. When he's got a $35 million war chest and says, "Oh well, we need campaign finance reform." It's sort of like physician, heal thyself.
I do think our governor from Mount Kisco has been pretty damn progressive himself, and frankly doesn't get enough credit, and frankly gets pissed on too often. He's made some of the most amazing progressive accomplishments in the state, from gun control being at the top of them. What an amazing accomplishment that nobody would have ever thought possible. Gay marriage, nobody would have ever thought possible. So the thing about Andrew Cuomo is, look, when he fixates on something, if he thinks something is a priority, he finds a way to get it done, and we got to give him credit for that. Last night, he had a double-digit victory that, yeah, the pundits, some of the people today, I can already see, particularly the folks in the New York Times who seem to want to dig at him every single second, you know, this notion of kind of the weakness of him. You know, look at the governor's races around the country. It was, I mean, it was a bloodbath all over for the Democrats. The governor's races were horrible. I mean, absolutely horrible for the Democrats. Andrew Cuomo, in fact, will win by the second largest margin of any incumbent Democrat in the country. The only one with a bigger margin than Andrew Cuomo will be Jerry Brown, and that's frankly cheating because in California, no, not literally. In California, there are only 2 candidates on the ballot by law because they have all the candidates in the primary and then only top 2. So there are no 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th party candidates like we're about to have come the next 4 years. So, you know, the governor had an amazing number in that context, and I think we're, of course, many of us who live here and breathe New York politics, we're thinking about in the context of Mario's numbers, in the context of what other people got. When you look at it in the context of last night and Maryland, the Maryland governor's race going down, in Vermont, the incumbent governor of Vermont won by 2 points, 47 to 45, right? In the great communist nation of Vermont, he won by 2 points. And by the way, in Vermont, of course, they do it crazy. If you don't get 50%, the legislature chooses. So he doesn't even know if he's been reelected. He has to wait till the legislature comes in to know whether or not he's going to be the governor. So in state after state, it was really, really a remarkably there was anti-incumbency for sure, but the Democrats took it on the chin. So I just, you know, I do think the governor doesn't get enough credit, frankly, for those accomplishments.
I think that it's important to keep in mind that, you know, the genius of Governor Cuomo, who I don't know personally but admire, is that he has governed from the progressive left, but he speaks to the competent center. And it's really a brilliant political management tool that he's used. He's going to benefit from this slim Senate margin because we all know, you know, the state Senate here, they're completely mashugana. They can't get out of their own way. No matter who's in charge, nobody's in charge. So I think he's in a unique position. You never know what happens in politics, but I do think he now has an opportunity to be a national voice. And if I were Democrats, I would study carefully how he governed and what he talked about and where those two things meet and where they diverge. And I think he really did a brilliant job. The other thing I think is very interesting, I just pick up on something Allison said, and I find myself in agreement with Allison, which is very troubling to me, is on minimum wage. You know, Republicans make the argument, because the National Federation of Independent Business tells us we should make the argument, that this is a state issue and states need to decide it. And in every state where it was an issue, people voted to raise the minimum wage. I think the minimum wage will be settled pretty much in the next 2 years, one way or the other, because there'll be enormous pressure from Republican-leaning and solid Republican states who have already passed an increase to push the federal agenda in that direction.
One of the questions is immigration reform, right? And to Wayne and Robert in particular to think about immigration reform. We know the president is, or we believe the president is in all probability going to do some sort of executive action delayed till after the elections because all the vulnerable senators frankly asked him to do so. And so there'll be some sort of executive action. But on the flip side, last night there's only one state Senate race where immigration was made a real issue. Obviously, it was a side issue in a bunch. But that was in the New Hampshire race where Scott Brown tried to make immigration reform the issue against Jeanne Shaheen. And she's the only one who won. I'm not saying she won because of that, right? I wouldn't say that. But it doesn't seem to have worked as a scare tactic. Even in upstate New York, in Sean Maloney won by 2,000 votes last night, a very tight margin. But when you look at how Democrats did nationwide, he also was attacked by Nain Hayworth on immigration and seems to have won. So the question, I think the question is, do the Republicans, because Robert, Wayne, you talk about the sort of demographic lock, if you don't fix the Latino problem, there's still a Republican problem for the next 10 years or so. So what do you think about immigration reform? Sorry to ask the question.
I can see that going either way, but I think though it sort of depends on what the president does in the next few weeks. I can't speak for Wayne, but I mean my personal viewpoint, and also basically what the Post has said on the editorial page. We're supportive of comprehensive immigration reform. Part of the problem is though that the president's actions and his words tend to cause the Republicans to sort of kind of pull back because they don't know whether they can trust him. If he does do some form of executive action, I think that makes it, given the very large majorities they have in the House and relatively strong one in the Senate now, I think that would make it much harder for there to be a real rapprochement on the immigration issue. I mean, I hope they manage it, and I hope the president doesn't, in a sense, sort of stir up a hornet's nest by acting unilaterally, because there is clearly a good segment amongst Republicans in the Senate who do want to get something done. But if it looks like the president is just giving them the finger on this, I don't think the rest of the Congress is going to work on it.
I think that not doing executive action in September, when the president originally promised it, was a fatal flaw in this election cycle. And I thought it then, and I think it even more now, because what happened was, yet again, the National Democrats said, we don't stand for anything, and we're too scared to do anything. And so the base, much of the base spent more time following the president around and protesting him at all of his campaign stops around not acting on immigration than they did mobilizing their members and their communities on behalf of Democrats and the folks who supposedly stand up for the things that they are fighting for.
There's no vital center in Washington for immigration reform. Something big like that requires a vital center, a coalition that comes together that creates a sort of political environment in which you can move significant legislation, because you can bring votes to something that are harder to get because there's built-in political cover. So I think the prospects for comprehensive immigration reform are fairly close to zero. The votes are certainly not there in the House, not even close. I don't think you could bring enough Democrats over to a bill that enough Republicans could vote for. And there isn't a lot of incentive on either side to address it. A lot of Republicans thinking about running for president are thinking about how they appeal to Republican primary voters whose views on immigration are at some variance with almost everyone in this room. And while it appears to all of us, because we're in New York and we talk to a lot of wealthy white people who are liberals, that immigration reform is incredibly popular, it's kind of a no-brainer, it isn't among primary voters, and it doesn't enjoy an enormous amount of support, broadly speaking. I think the chance for doing big things is still fairly low. The opportunity for things like immigration reform, comprehensive tax reform, these things are still low. We haven't reestablished a vital center of politics where you put together enough votes in the House, in the Senate, to pass significant legislation and create an opportunity to send something to the president. And I will say, I've kind of been a little bit more defending the president, which is an odd thing for me to do, and saying it's not all entirely his fault. I will say two things about New York. First, Senator Schumer is in an incredibly important position because there are very few real legislators who know how to make deals and create an opportunity for big things to happen. And on bills that we don't all think about too much, like the veterans bill, it was Schumer who put the deal together. It sure as heck wasn't Bernie Sanders from Vermont and Jim Inhofe, who wants to take the word environment out of the name of his committee that he's chairing. Okay, sure, but
that will change everything.
that's a big move. But I do think New York, oddly enough, was helped in some ways because Schumer's now the most powerful Democrat in the Congress. He's a deal maker. He knows how to get things done. He's a ferocious protector and somebody who's committed to advancing the interests of New York. And lastly, you've got a couple of Republican congressmen, particularly a fellow named Tom Reed from upstate New York, a part of New York where I grew up near the Finger Lakes, who's now going to be one of the most influential members of the Republican leadership, appointed, not elected, and he's on the Ways and Means Committee, and he's very sensitive to the importance of downstate in carrying the economy. So I think New York's in an interesting position.
You mentioned Senator Schumer. You know, all the senators from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut are now Democratic members of the minority. How does that affect New York in its dealings? In
Schumer is the greatest practitioner of the three parts of successfully legislating. First is he's excellent at posturing. He knows how to posture issues to create fault lines in the parties. And second, he's very good at positioning, at beginning to move away from the ends of any particular issue, create positions in the middle that begin to look attractive to a lot of people. And the third thing about Senator Schumer is he's an alchemist. And legislating on big things requires alchemy. Mm-hmm. And there are damn few alchemists in the Congress, in my experience, and I spend a lot of time up there wandering around talking to people. So Senator Booker's an interesting guy. You know, he's kind of he's a celebrity, and that makes him interesting. He's attractive, he's articulate. If he learns how to legislate, he could be significant.
Something that Republicans had to learn over two cycles, and I think Democrats are going to have to start learning as well, that candidate quality does matter. Mm-hmm. And we were just making a joke about Michael Grimm, but I'm sorry, if there's a candidate who has who's facing a 20-count indictment, the other party should be able to put an opponent, who's not going to lose by double digits. I'm sorry, if Dominic Recchia has some friends here, I apologize, but he ran an awful campaign, and there were a number of the biggest statewide, not New York statewide, but nationally one, Bruce Braley in Iowa, basically blew the election in the first couple of months when he made jokes about Iowa farmers and so forth. So I mean, candidates really do matter, and sometimes the establishment does have to strike back and make sure that the strongest candidate is out there.
The final part about Schumer, I just want to remind people on the alchemy piece, which I think is a brilliant way of putting it. Chuck has done an amazing job of cultivating the Senate moderates, all of them. The Democrats and the Republicans, they all know that they can make deals with Chuck. And on the Democratic side, whether it's Senator Manchin and Senator King, Senator Manchin of West Virginia, Senator King of Maine, Chuck Schumer was deeply involved in helping them, helping their elections, et cetera, helping to guide them as they came to Washington. That's a part of why his alchemy works. And why very soon, if not 2 years from now, I believe he'll be the leader of the United States Senate.
President Obama, and it's clear obviously from his congressional relations office too, he is not the glad-hander that, say, a Bill Clinton or, for that matter, George W. Bush was in terms of being able to engage legislators on issues of national provenance, and that's a big void that's in the White House. Joe Biden is often the go-to person for people who want to get those kind of deals done.
And he'll be even more so with McConnell, way more.
Let me turn it over to our host, Bill Rudin.
Mitch, you did a fantastic job, as you always do, and I want to thank our panelists. Obviously, exciting times for our city and our country. We'll continue to do what we're doing here at ABNY, having the dialogue, pointing people in the right direction in terms of what we think is important, whether it's tax reform, school education, crime, infrastructure, transportation, affordable housing. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the day, and thank our panel.